What's up YouTube? I'm an average dad, and this is the first video in a two-part series where I DIY an entire Flagstone patio complete with a smokeless fire pit. Now, you may be thinking, wow, that's a really original, terrific, original idea. To which I'd say, I know. But in all seriousness, my wife wanted a patio and a fire pit, so here we find ourselves. Now, this story starts, like most good stories, with me scouring Facebook looking for a spicy hot deal. Seriously, you guys, there's hot deals to be had on Marketplace. I've been kind of casually thinking about trying to do a Flagstone patio myself. I knew that a pallet of Flagstone cost around $500 to $600 at the local stone yard. So on this fateful day, I discovered someone was selling a little bit more than a pallet of Flagstone for a mere 100 doll hairs.
Doll hairs?
So I immediately messaged him, said I would come get it, rented a truck, got a friend to help me. Caleb, thank you. But let's go ahead and jump into the build. Be sure to stick around to the end if you want to see a complete cost breakdown as well as some sweet before and after footage. If you enjoy the video or are inspired by it, please consider hitting that like button down below. Blah, blah, blah. You guys know the drill. Let's get to it. This is the fire pit that came with our current house. Leaves a little bit to be desired. Probably took under an hour, including the time to go to the hardware store to build it. So today we're going to make it a little better. First off, we're going to mark the center of where the new fire pit will be. I'm going to make it a little bit further away from the house. So I'll mark that with a stake and then use a string to draw a perfect circle around that. So I'm going to tie that real tight around the stake and around the spray can. Not. So we'll go ahead and retie that and try again. And this circle I'm drawing is about 15 feet in diameter. And then I did one more pass to make sure it was nice and easy to see. As a wise man probably once said, never miss a good opportunity for branding. Alright, so now we got to remove all these retaining wall blocks. And yes, I am just, whoop, twofer. Putting these just in the corner of the backyard for now. If you would subscribe to the channel, it'd be super awesome. It doesn't cost anything, but it helps me out a lot. And subscribing to the channel also helps. All right, now for the dirt removal. And this was by far the least fun part of the project. Others who DIY'd this on YouTube talked about how they could roll up larger sections, but I was not able to do that. My yard was really dry. Hindsight 2020, I probably would go back and try to water it and see if that made this a little bit easier. What seemed to work best for me was just taking it out in these kind of 18-inch square pieces. In total, the grass removal took me about 8 to 10 hours, so I'd highly recommend getting a friend or two to help out with this portion. Alright, that's probably enough with the digging time lapse, so we'll keep moving on. So after the sod's gone, I still need to remove some dirt, so Mr. Son Joe here is going to help me with that portion. This is an electric tiller. The time I was editing this video cost about $150 new. I bought it on Facebook Marketplace, I think for $35. So believe it or not, I'd never used a tiller before. At first I was moving it back and forth pretty quick like a vacuum, but this did almost nothing. So finally I learned that you have to move it pretty slow and really let those tines dig in to move any amount of dirt. Using this method, I removed probably another 2 inches of dirt for a total of around 5 inches for the circle. So after doing that for a couple hours, now you can see we have a nice kind of evenly flat base that's a couple inches below where the sod was. Next is the sand and rock. So this is what a half ton of sand and 2.5 tons of rock looks like. For the rock, I'm using AB3 gravel, which is crushed limestone. That makes a great base layer because the particles vary in size a bunch and are jagged, so it packs together really well. For the leveling material, I would have liked to use decomposed granite, but I couldn't find that where I'm at, so I just used construction sand. For the gravel, I ended up laying it about 2 inches deep. Resources online will tell you to do closer to 4 inches deep, especially if you're using pavers instead of flagstones. But the dirt was really hard underneath, and I packed it very often as I went through. So not best practice, but so far it's worked out for us. To pack it down as I went, I used a hand tamper I got from Nards for about $40. You can rent mechanical ones that are gas powered, but I ended up doing this over the course of 3 or 4 days, so I didn't want to mess with renting multiple times, bringing it back and forth, or paying for it for a week. So this is how it looked when it was all covered with gravel. It was a little bit too sloped away from the house, so I decided to go back and add a little bit more the next day. You can see here I'm getting a little bit of help from my neighbors. I think they probably felt sorry for me trying to move 5,000 pounds of material to the backyard all by myself. I would highly recommend having good neighbors. It's been really great being friends with the people who live next to us. Anyway, you can see as we go along, we are checking to see if it's still sloped a little bit with the level attached to that 12-foot board, and then tamping it down often. And then here doing chair check to see if it feels a little bit too reclined when you're on that far side, and then we'll refine the center since it's now covered in gravel. Before I lay the flagstone, I'm going to go ahead and make the brick ring around the fire pit so I know where those edges will be at. To do this, I used 2 different block sizes from Menards that were also different colors. When I bought them, I wasn't sure exactly what pattern would work best, so I'm laying them out here and ended up going with 2, 1, 1 for the large brick pattern, repeating with a small brick in between each. After I have that pattern set, I'm going to go ahead and remove a few bricks and then use sand and the mallet to make sure this bottom ring is absolutely as level as I can get it. About half my time with the bricks was spent on this first ring, just because obviously everything else will be stacked on top of that, so it's important to spend the time to get this first part right. So after I check that again with the level and we're looking good, I'll go ahead and move on to the second ring. I'll go over this more in the next video that solely concentrates on the smokeless aspect of the fire pit, but in order to make it smokeless, I'm going to go ahead and remove a couple bricks on the second row to promote airflow to help create a clean and quick burn. So with those bricks removed, then I can go ahead and do the third row, and then last but not least, the fourth row. So that bottom row will be partially covered by sand and flagstone, and then we'll have 3 full rows exposed on top. So there's the finished fire pit surround. And finally, after all that prep work, it is time to start placing flagstones. I'm going to start by outlining the fire pit ring, so I'll place about 1/2 inch to inch of sand around there, and then pick the stones that will best outline it. So here is that inner ring once it's been placed. Now I'll go ahead and work on the exterior outline of the patio. At the very end, we'll be working with really small pieces, and I didn't want those to be on the outermost edge, so we'll go ahead and do the outside now and use the largest stones that we have. And as I go, I'll adjust the sand underneath each stone by hand to make sure it doesn't rock and sits nice and flat. You can also see I've unstacked the rest of the flagstone and placed it around the patio so I can kind of see what I'm working with, as well as having the added bonus of killing as much of my grass as possible. While I'm playing Tetris here, we'll go over the cost. So the flagstone themselves were $100. The truck to get them home was $77. The sand and gravel delivered was $167. And then the fire pit surround bricks were also $167.
What a coincidence.
Which brings us to a grand total of $511. If I would have hired a professional to do this, it probably would have cost somewhere between $3,500 and $4,500. With a savings of over $3,000, this was an exceptionally spicy hot deal. I give it 4 cayenne peppers.
Just as a quick reminder, the electric tiller did cost $35, but I'm confident I would be able to sell it for that if I wanted to, but have opted to keep it for other projects.
So now I'm in the final stage, as you can see, and there's just a few spots open. And at this point, spent probably twice as much time just looking around, seeing what would fit as placing the stones, because it was getting pretty tricky. About this time, the pieces I had left were getting to be too big, so this is my high-tech way of breaking them into smaller pieces. Please note, I did not have safety glasses on during this. Please do not follow my example. I should have been wearing safety glasses. But this is just one of those retaining wall blocks from the old fire pit, and worked decently well just to break those up into smaller pieces in a hurry. So now I'll go around and fill in those larger gaps with those pieces and some sand. Now it's starting to really look like a finished patio. The last thing to do is fill the remaining cracks with sand. So here you can see I'm packing it down. I used, like I said earlier, just the construction sand instead of polymetric sand, which will harden and become kind of like concrete. I wasn't sure how much this would settle over the first year, and so just wanted to opt to add more sand later if needed instead of using the polymeric sand. But packing it down really didn't do much. I ended up moving some of the stones. If I did this again, I would just spread it out and kind of let the rain settle it into place. Speaking of rain though, once I got it all swept off, I hosed it down, and would you look at that? Looks like a flagstone patio.
Sure does look swell, Clark.
So here's what it looked like before and after. If you want to